Alright, enough screwing around. Let's do this. This is a thing I've been meaning to get back to, but oh, come on, you've all seen the output on the channel since early May. I've been more than a little preoccupied, to say the least, but none of that matters because I'm here to talk more about Ultrakill, specifically the game's second act, Imperfect Hatred. Originally released on August 16th of 2022, this act contains the Greed, Wrath, and Heresy layers and serves as the middle third of Ultrakill as a whole. The final act, which I just found out is called Godfist Suicide, and that's so ridiculous that I love it, is still in development, and it's gonna be a while before we can wrap the whole thing up. I'm cool with it because Act 2 is fucking awesome, and somehow manages to be better than Infinite Hyperdeath, which I didn't think was possible, but I'm meandering. Let's get the show on the road. The first thing that stuck out to me was just the way that these new layers look. Much like Limbo, Lust, and Gluttony were no slouches in the looks department, you can tell that Imperfect Hatred is where Hakita and Associates really flexed their muscles. From Greed looking like a massive sand-blasted desert dotted with the ruins of various worldwide landmarks and filled with Egyptian-style ruins, to Wrath looking like an undersea cavern and eventually becoming a massive abandoned ship in the middle of a raging ocean, to Heresy looking like a blood keep straight out of Doom 64, complimentary of course. This is where we start to see Ultrakill get much more ambitious with both its environments and level design. I don't know much about color theory, but the use of yellows and greens in Greed highlights the harshness of the environment. Oh, and there's sand everywhere.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
And the sand goddamn burns you if you touch it! Oh, and this is also where we see the Greed-specific mechanic. Enemies covered in sand both become way tankier and don't bleed, meaning you can't heal yourself. This is the start of Imperfect Hatred doing everything in its power to kill the absolute shit out of you, because this takes the approach of introducing an entire game-lasting mechanic for a specific area, then never using it again, like the Time Watch bit in Titanfall 2. This is also reflected in Wrath, but less a layer-specific mechanic and more you call in a giant uninhabited cruise ship, and it capsizes level 2 later. Heresy doesn't follow that trait. I'll explain later when we get to more in-depth discussions about combat design. On paper, Imperfect Hatred doesn't really add all that much. Only a small handful of new enemies, only one new weapon from the base arsenal, and a new arm. But it uses all these tools in the same way that Doom 2 used the Super Shotgun and its new monsters at the time to create challenges to push the player to their limits in their first playthrough. The first of which being this motherfucker.
What is that? What the fuck is that?
Remember how Act 1 ends with you fighting Gabriel, a literal angel? Well, turns out he wasn't the only one in hell. These things are called virtues. They're large, stationary orbs that function as track and kill satellites. If you leave them alone for too long, they get enraged and they start constantly blasting you like it's going out of style, and will drop an explosive knockback when they die. These would be annoying if they weren't able to get one shot by the railgun. And while that is a pretty big change, the introduction of an enemy with a tracking AoE is a good way to keep players moving, Greed and Wrath's difficulty comes more from a platforming perspective. Between the burning sands on the outside and later fighting your way through a pitch-black tomb with only a torch to light your way, the fourth layer is more so designed to test your navigation skills than anything. The Wrath layer is also more about managing your movement across narrow passages, cramped hallways and interiors, and a raging storm. When you inevitably get your orientation turned a good 45 degrees to the right, you also have to manage all that and having it be in various states of flooded. These challenges would be insurmountable even with Ultrakill's very good movement mechanics, which is where the new arm comes in. How do you get it? This way. You're probably wondering who this is. This is V2. I never mentioned him in the previous video because all the footage I had of fighting him was him completely tearing me into esophagus. He's U but red and is the closest thing this game has to having a rival in the classic character action game sense. He moves fast, hits hard, and uses a lot of the same gimmicks as you do. But he has a new arm because we stole his other one. He was a huge pain in the ass to fight because I was learning the systems back in Infinite Hyperdeath. Now he was way easier, but still a threat. And when you get him to half health, this happens.
You know, I don't think he'll be getting up from that one.
Oh my god, that was so fucking cool! Sorry about that. But this is where we get the final arm, the Whiplash. Let's not beat around the bush. It's a goddamn grappling hook. Ultrakill gives you a goddamn grappling hook, game of the forever. But in all seriousness, it's cool. You can use it to grapple between green grappling points and slingshot yourself with blue points. It becomes integral to dealing with the stuff in the Wrath layer because the first bit of that layer tutorializes you on how to use it in combat. You can pull down small enemies like Scorpion from Mortal Kombat, which is great for clutch healing, and you can pull yourself to larger enemies like grappling points, as a video game grappling hook logic tends to do. But you gotta be careful, because using the grappling hook all willy-nilly causes you to build up gray health, meaning you heal for less. It's called the break gauge, and it's Ultrakill's way of punishing you for not being on top of your game and taking needless damage. It was introduced in Act 1, but I just sort of forgot about it. The sole exception to this break gauge limit on the grappling hook is that it doesn't apply when underwater. So go nuts. I'm serious, that's literally Ultrakill's wording that I'm using verbatim. And most of Wrath is set underwater, so yeah. Hakita wanted people to mess around with this thing. But that's enough about the platforming and all that stuff. We need to talk about the combat design of Imperfect Hatred and the weapon that plays into it. The combat encounters in Ultrakill's second act take a cue from the platforming and level design. This is where Imperfect Hatred goes from just another hit of Ultrakill to a different experience, more refined, more intense, more violent. This is where the Devil May Cry inspirations go from cute lip service to showcasing how far and how hard these systems and mechanics can go within the confines of the first-person shooter. I may sound hyperbolic, but Imperfect Hatred is where the game genre classification can get a bit murky, because this is more like a genuine first-person character action game than it is a boomer shooter. And it's still also technically a boomer shooter at the same time. While this footage may look like a first-person shooter, it doesn't feel like a first-person shooter, if that makes any sense. A good chunk of that is due to the new weapon, the rocket launcher. It obviously shoots rockets, but it only does damage on direct hits, meaning that the resultant shockwave knocks enemies into the air. This caused a switch to flip in my head and made me go, oh my goodness, I can use this to launch a bunch of enemies for combos. And that's what I tried to start to do, and it's magical! And then there's the alternate fire. It basically freezes your rockets in place like your Dio from JoJo, which is to say you can set up for massive damage. There are also other attachments, but I haven't used them because of, time-stopping rockets. That's too sick! But that's not to say it's overpowered. It has its strengths and weaknesses, too. While really good against crowds and dealing a ton of damage, the rockets bounce off of the malicious face enemies, and the flamethrower dudes will parry the fuck out of them. Which I'm fine with, because I killed those with the chainsaw bayonet on the shotgun for the latter, and the railgun for the former. We also got more new enemies than just the virtues. Greed has the layer-specific stalkers, weak zombies that have sand tanks that can cover other enemies in the sand that they carry, making them not bleed, and like I mentioned earlier in this video, that's bad if you aren't paying attention because blood is fuel. And we got a new machine enemy in the form of the Sentry, a long-range enemy that can snipe you to death with high-damage hit-scan attacks, which can be countered by a ground shockwave, railgun shot, or a pistol shot to the antenna. It kills fast and it dies fast, which is a needed enemy type to have in games like this. And that about does it for regular enemies added to Imperfect Hatred. All of them are great additions, and the way they change combat encounters is shown as early as the end of the second level of Greed. Oh, and there's also these weird idol statues that make one enemy immune to damage, and it gets played with in some interesting ways. Heresy is the final layer of Act 2, but only comprises of 2 levels, with the second one being the final boss fight of Imperfect Hatred, and a penultimate level beforehand. Before I get to that, the standout areas of these combats are the boss fights. You got the Ferryman in Wrath, who just jumps around and uses a twin blade while fighting, and when you get him low enough, just starts chucking lightning at you. And there's also the Leviathan, yes, the biblical Leviathan, a massive sea serpent that swings its weight around, fires a mouthful of lasers at you, and tries to swallow you whole. This is more of a set-piece boss, and I initially wondered why I was struggling against it, and then I remembered that I have a rocket launcher. Then I just steamrolled him. And then there's the first level of Heresy, which is just a massive combat gauntlet that pushes you to your absolute limit. It constantly switches enemies, it layers them in interesting ways, and it's best if I just show you instead of just explaining all of it.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
And then there's Gabriel. Remember what I said about V2 being your rival?
Alive!
Yeah, turns out it was Gabriel this entire time. He's back for round 2 and super pissed about the spanking V1 gave him, and he wants revenge. Instead of constantly swapping weapons that he made out of light, he instead dual-wields sabers and is mega aggressive. Well, 2 can play at that game because I mainly just bum-rushed him with my shotgun and beat him in less than a minute. And that's Imperfect Hatred in a nutshell. Overall, it was a great refining and escalation of the mechanics introduced in Infinite Hyperdeath. It remains as one of the best first-person shooters in the indie space today, even in its early access state, and I highly recommend that you give it a try if you're interested. The amount of confidence and clarity of vision on display here is enough to make you feel genuine goddamn joy. The hatred may be imperfect, but Act 2 of Ultrakill is perfectly lovely. And that's going to be it for this week's video. Thank you very much for watching to the end, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. Thank you, and have a wonderful weekend. Now to patiently wait in agonizing silence for Godfist's suicide to finish development. God give me strength.